My world ended the day my son, the boy I had given my entire life to, told me I was a burden and to find somewhere else to live. My only crime had been losing the job I worked for 35 years. What he did not know was that I was secretly sitting on an $8 million inheritance. And in that moment, when he shut the door on me, I decided he was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life, a lesson about the true price of compassion. For more than 3 decades, my life was defined by the piercing scream of a 4:30 a.m. alarm clock. My name is Catherine. Every morning, I would force down a cup of bitter instant coffee in the quiet dark of my small Michigan kitchen before driving to the automotive parts plant. That factory, with its constant roar and the sharp smell of hot metal, was more than my job. It was the promise I made to my husband, John, on the day we buried him. Our son, Ethan, was only 7 years old. As I held that little boy's hand, I swore to John that Ethan would have the world. He would get the education we could only dream of and a life free from the grease-stained hands, an aching back that I knew all too well. I kept that promise with every fiber of my being. Every double shift I volunteered for, every company picnic I skipped to work overtime, every Thanksgiving I spent on the assembly line during a plant retooling, it was all for him. When he got into a prestigious university in Boston, I did not just pay his tuition. I took out a second mortgage to make sure he had a private dorm room so he could study in peace. When it was time for his first car, I bought him a brand new, safe Subaru, while I continued to patch up my old Ford Focus. And when he decided to buy his first condo, a stunning glass box overlooking the Boston Harbor, I liquidated the majority of my retirement fund for his down payment without a second thought. I never saw it as a cost. It was an investment in his future. I never expected him to pay me back. Seeing him thrive in his high-powered finance job, dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage that was supposed to be my dividend. But the higher Ethan climbed, the more he seemed to be ashamed of the worn, working-class ladder he had used to get there. Our phone conversations shrank from long chats to brief, perfunctory check-ins. His visits home became rare, then non-existent. He was always on the verge of a big deal, always had a networking event, always had plans with his sophisticated girlfriend, Olivia. I tried to understand. He was building the life I had always wanted for him. But a deep, silent canyon was forming between us. I was his blue-collar mom from the Midwest, and he was a man of the world. We were no longer speaking the same language. Then, at 61 years old, the foundation of my world turned to dust. The plant, a pillar of American manufacturing for generations, was bought out and shuttered, its assets sold to an international conglomerate. My 35 years of unwavering loyalty earned me a mediocre severance package, a condescending pat on the shoulder from a human resources manager half my age, and a cardboard box to carry my life's work. In an instant, I was no longer a provider. I was unemployed and adrift. The severance was something, but combined with what was left of my retirement, it was a rapidly draining pond, not a sustainable lake. The thought of finding new work at my age felt like staring up at a sheer cliff face with no ropes. It was in the middle of that terrifying week, while I was staring at a mountain of bills on my kitchen table, that a strange piece of mail arrived. It was a heavy, linen envelope with the name of a high-end law firm in Seattle embossed on the flap. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter concerned the estate of my Aunt Alina. I barely knew her. She was my father's eccentric sister, a fiercely private woman who had quietly made a fortune in commercial real estate decades ago and lived out her life on a secluded property overlooking Puget Sound. We had met maybe 4 or 5 times in my entire life, but she would call once or twice a year, asking about my work at the plant and about Ethan. She always said she respected a woman who knew the value of hard work. I had no clue she was a multimillionaire, and I certainly never imagined that she would name me, her humble factory worker niece, as the sole beneficiary of her entire estate. The number on the legal document felt like a typo. $8 million. I read the words over and over, the print blurring as my eyes filled with tears. I was no longer a laid-off 61-year-old woman facing a bleak and uncertain future. I was rich. My very first impulse was to pick up the phone and call Ethan, to shout the incredible news, to tell him that all of our worries were gone forever. But then, a cold, painful thought stopped me. For the past several years, I had felt like I was little more than a bank to him. An ATM he visited when he needed something. What would happen if he knew about this money? Would his affection, if it suddenly returned, be real? Or would it be for the fortune? A small, wounded part of my heart needed to know the truth. So I devised a test. A simple, heartbreaking test. I would go to him not as an heiress, but as a desperate woman who had lost everything. I would ask for the one thing I had given him his entire life, a safety net. I needed to see the true character of the man I had raised. I drove my old Ford all the way to Boston, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. His building was a monument to modern wealth, all glass and chrome, with a concierge who looked at my dusty car as if it were a piece of trash that had blown in from the street. When Ethan finally answered his apartment door, he had an expression of sheer annoyance on his face, as if my presence was an inconvenient disruption to his perfectly curated day. His home was immaculate and sterile, like a magazine photo. Cold gray furniture, giant, meaningless paintings on the walls, and a panoramic view of the city that I knew cost a fortune. "Mom," he said, his body language blocking the entrance. "What is it?" "I'm in the middle of preparing for a big presentation." "It will only take a minute, honey," I said, gently pushing past him into the cold, impersonal living room. I sat on the edge of a sofa that felt more like a modern art installation than a piece of furniture. I took a shaky breath and told him my story. The factory closing, the job loss, my fear of losing my house. I did not exaggerate or beg for pity. I just told him the truth, the version of the truth that did not include an $8 million windfall. Then I made my humble request. "I was thinking, just for a little while, Ethan, just until I can figure things out and get back on my feet. Maybe I could stay here, in your guest room. I promise I will not be any trouble at all." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Ethan did not even look at me. He walked to his massive window and stared out at the bustling city below. He let out a long, theatrical sigh, a sound of profound irritation that hurt me more than shouting ever could. He rubbed his temples like a man burdened by an unsolvable problem. "Mom, I cannot," he said, finally turning to look at me. His face was not filled with sympathy or regret. It was filled with frustration. "I cannot have you living here. It is just not a workable situation. Olivia and I, we have our life, our routine. This is not a big place." I glanced around the enormous, open-concept condo. It was easily twice the size of the little house where he grew up. "Ethan, I am not asking you to support me. I would not be a burden. I just need a roof over my head for a month. Maybe two." He shook his head, his jaw tight with resolve. "A burden is a burden, Mom. Listen, I am truly sorry about your job. I am, but you are a grown woman. You will have to find another solution. Maybe you should look into some of those senior, assisted living places or something." Senior assisted living. He said the words so casually, as if he were suggesting I try a new brand of coffee. He was discarding me, disposing of me like an old, worn-out chair that clashed with his new, expensive decor. I had spent my entire adult life making sure he would never have to worry for a single day. And in my first and only moment of need, he treated me like a complete stranger. In that instant, something inside me shattered. The last ounce of maternal hope I had carried into that apartment evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard, and undeniable clarity. I saw him then, not as my little boy, but as the man he had become. A man who was selfish, ungrateful, and completely blind to the mountain of sacrifices made in his name. The $8 million secret in my bank account suddenly felt like armor around my broken heart. I stood up, my posture straighter and my gaze steadier than it had been just moments before. "You are right, Ethan," I said, my voice eerily calm and even. "I will figure something else out." I did not yell, I did not cry. I simply turned and walked to the door. He did not move to stop me. He just stood there and let me go. As I drove away from that gleaming tower of glass, leaving my son and the life I had built for him behind me, a new plan began to take shape in my mind. The lesson was not over. It was just getting started. Instead of revealing my fortune, I committed completely to the role he had assigned me. I rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in a gritty, working-class neighborhood across town. It was the kind of place Ethan would be horrified to even drive through. The paint was peeling, and the plumbing made strange noises in the night, but it was mine. I started wearing my old, comfortable clothes again. I sold my car and learned the city bus schedule. To any outside observer, I was exactly what my son believed me to be: a broke, jobless old woman, barely scraping by. But behind this facade, I was living an entirely different reality. I hired the team of financial advisors recommended by my aunt's law firm. They were brilliant. I dove into a new world of portfolios, trusts, and philanthropic endowments. I approached managing my wealth the same way I approached my work at the plant, with meticulous attention to detail and a desire to build something meaningful and lasting. My first major act was to establish a charitable foundation in my late husband's name, the John's Pledge Foundation. Its sole purpose was to provide scholarships and trade school grants for children from low-income families. I was using my fortune to give other deserving kids the same opportunities I had given Ethan. Several months passed without a single word from him. Not one call, not one text message. Nothing. He had cut me out of his life as easily as one unsubscribes from an unwanted email list. The irony was that I was doing better than I had in years. I was finally living for myself. I took a quiet trip out west to see the Grand Canyon, something I had always dreamed of doing. I flew to Seattle and spent a week exploring the rugged coastline where my Aunt Alina had built her empire. I was rediscovering Catherine, the woman who existed before she was only Ethan's mom. Then, late one evening, my phone buzzed. It was him. A stupid, traitorous flutter of hope rose in my chest before I mercilessly stamped it out. I knew this was not a social call. "Mom," his voice was thin and tight, laced with a panic he was failing to conceal. "Hey, how are you doing?" "I am managing Ethan," I said, my voice deliberately tired and flat. "The bus takes some getting used to, but I am learning. What is wrong?" He let out a shaky breath. "Look, I am in a bad spot. I made a few aggressive investments, a new green tech startup. It was supposed to be the next big thing, but it was a fraud. I lost, Mom. I lost everything." I remained silent, letting his confession hang in the air between us. "I am in real trouble," he finally choked out, his voice cracking with emotion. "The bank is threatening foreclosure. I am going to lose the condo if I cannot raise some capital, and fast." The condo, the very same home that had no room for his mother, but plenty of space for his ego. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it, but I stayed in character. "Oh, Ethan, that is just awful," I said, my voice dripping with helpless sympathy. "I wish there was something I could do to help you." "Well, that is why I am calling," he said, his tone shifting from panic to urgent. "I need your help. I need a loan. $50,000, just to pay off the most immediate debts, to get the bank off my back until I can get this sorted out. $50,000. To the new me, it was a negligible sum, less than the interest I earned in a month. To him, it was a lifeline. And he had the audacity to come to me, the woman he thought was destitute, to ask for it. Ethan, I sighed, letting a long, heavy pause fill the silence. $50,000. Son, I lost my job. I am living in a tiny apartment on a fixed income. Where in the world do you think I would get that kind of money? I heard a frustrated sound on the other end of the line, like a muffled growl. I do not know. Your severance? Your retirement savings? Mom, this is my life we're talking about. You have to have something put away. He was not asking. He was demanding. He was not begging for a lifeline. He was trying to cash a check he felt he was owed. He saw me as a dusty, forgotten savings account he could crack open in an emergency. That was it. That was the moment I knew for certain. He had learned absolutely nothing. I told him to meet me for coffee the next morning. I picked a place near my new apartment, a gritty, old-fashioned diner with cracked vinyl booths and watery coffee served in thick ceramic mugs. He arrived looking like a ghost. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark, hollow circles under his eyes. He looked completely out of place, and the discomfort was written all over his face. He did not even bother with small talk. He launched into a frantic, detailed explanation of his financial ruin. He barely touched the coffee the waitress set in front of him. I just listened, taking slow, deliberate sips from my mug, my face a calm, unreadable mask. When he finally ran out of steam, breathless and looking at me with desperate, expectant eyes, I placed my mug down on the saucer with a soft click. So you need my help, I stated, my voice quiet but firm. Yes, Mom. Desperately, he pleaded, leaning across the table. That is interesting, I said, my gaze shifting to the window, to the normal, everyday people walking down the street. Because I seem to recall a time, just a few months ago, when I needed your help. I was not asking for money, Ethan. I was just asking for a bed. A temporary place to sleep in your guest room. Do you remember what you told me? He flinched as if I had struck him. His eyes fell to the chipped tabletop. Mom, I know I handled that badly. I was stressed out, I was wrong, okay? But this is different. Is it? I leaned in, my voice dropping even lower, forcing him to meet my eyes. Is it really different? Or is it just that our situations have been reversed? You told me, and I believe your exact words were, I cannot have you living here. You told me I would have to find another solution. You made it perfectly clear that your life and my problems were two separate things. You were the one who cut the rope, Ethan. You do not get to demand. I tie it back together now, just because you find yourself falling. His face contorted into an ugly mask of disbelief and rage. Are you serious right now? You are really going to hold that over my head? I am your son. A short, dry laugh escaped my lips. Yes, you are my son, and I am the woman who gave you everything. The woman who asked for absolutely nothing in return except for a small measure of human decency. And when the time came for you to show it, you failed the test. This is not about holding a grudge. A grudge is an emotion. This is about consequences. This is a lesson in cause and effect. You treated me like an inconvenience to be thrown away. You cannot now decide to treat me like a solution to your problems. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open, speechless. For the first time, he was not seeing his meek, accommodating mother. He was seeing a woman made of steel. I am sorry, Ethan, I said, and a part of me truly was. I was sorry for the man he had chosen to become. I cannot help you. He shot up from his seat, the legs of his chair screeching horribly against the linoleum floor. The entire diner turned to look. Fine, he spat, his voice shaking with fury. Just fine. I should have known better than to ask you for anything. I do not need you anyway. he slammed a $20 bill onto the table and stormed out of the diner, leaving the bitter smell of his failure hanging in the air. I watched him go, and for the first time in so many months, I did not feel a single pang of pain or anger. All I felt was a profound and quiet sense of peace. I had given him his final, most important lesson. Whether he learned from it was now entirely up to him. Perhaps losing that condo, perhaps hitting the rock bottom he so richly deserved, would finally teach him the one thing my sacrifices never could: that your character is the only asset you can never afford to lose. I paid the bill and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. I felt lighter than I had in years. My son would never again see me as a burden. But more importantly, I would never again see his approval as my reward. My real fortune was not the $8 million sitting in the bank. It was the freedom I had just given myself. My wealth was my own now, to be used to honor my husband's memory and to build a new legacy of kindness and opportunity for others. Ethan would have to build his own future. And I, for the first time in a very, very long time, was incredibly excited to get on with building mine.